If you're anything like me, you've probably watched an inspirational drummer or two, then sat down and tried to do what they're doing, and come away feeling like you want to quit the drums. Some people just have the gift, and that's clearly not me. Maybe I just don't have the talent. And I get this all the time in my comments too. Some people just have it, you can't teach that. But one pretty prominent drummer recently said, "Fuck all that." He released a video and a tweet saying, let me make sure I have this. "Oh, talent is a lie." Others, including Sean Crowder, whose video I've referenced before, have done a good job chronicling their progress from novice to good. And I'm sure that goes a long way. Think about it like this. Say I'm Joey Beginner here, and I'm shed duffing along, and I open up Instagram, and see Siberiano playing something like this, and I think, well, I'm never gonna have that, so I might as well just quit. Because I'm comparing my abilities now to Siberiano's years ahead of me on the journey. Maybe if I see something like this, I'll realize there was a time when he was still in his formative years, and stop comparing my work in progress with his finished product. So that addresses the shallow argument. I'll never have it because I can't conceive of how much better than me this drummer sounds right now. Yay! There's a chance for me to be great! But it doesn't address deeper forms of the argument. What? Like, what if the reason Siberiano was able to keep developing from that earlier state was because of talent? And what if you don't have that level of talent, and so you're just doomed to stay in one place while Siberiano got better? Come on! Sorry, but there's actually some research on this. You may not be familiar with the Swedish psychologist named Anders Ericsson, or his 1997 publication, The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance, but you're probably familiar with the pop psychology concept it spawned, the so-called 10,000 hour rule. I did a video on this years ago, but it's probably time for a refresh. Anyway, the findings of that study and a number of observable real-world phenomena complicate the idea that there's a bright line between have talent or never going to have it. At least as far as it pertains to anyone watching this video. And I'll explain what that means. Anyway, my name is Nate, and this is the 80/20 Drummer. And on this channel, we like to get 15% nerdier than some of the other drum channels. We elevate overthinking to an art. Like, think of me as somebody who would have had one of those science channels if I were smart enough, but instead I just play the drums. Anyway, today we'll try to take a deeper dive on the meaning of talent. And if you stick around to the end, little spoiler, I'm going to tell you why I think you should be more hopeful than maybe you were at the beginning of this video. Or you can skip ahead to that, but I think you'll enjoy taking the journey. Come on, take the journey! Talent on drums, is it a lie? And what does it mean for you, dear viewer, if you're an aspiring drummer? Stay tuned. And folks, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you just did two interesting things. Number one, you clicked on a video about whether talent exists on drums. And number two, you kept watching past the flashy intro to this point, which must mean you're interested in content that dives a little bit deeper and gets a little nerdier. And if that describes you, there's no reason you shouldn't be on my mailing list. Because people on my mailing list get the video of the week early, and the podcast early, and a free drum course, and exclusive access to offers like my coaching, which you may be interested in if you're one of these dig deeper people. All of which is to say, you can get on the list, start getting the podcast and the video early, just by clicking the link below the player and giving us your email address on the next page. That's it, on to the rest of the video. Let's start by talking about the 10,000 hour rule and how it complicates the some people are just born with it picture. I may have mentioned this in my last Nature Nurture video, but in 2008, I almost quit the drums. I decided that certain people clearly just had what it took, and that probably wasn't me. After all, I'd put in the last few years of trying to learn the instrument seriously, and I felt like I was still stuck. Then I picked up a pop science book called Outliers, and read about something called the 10,000 hour rule. Within a week, I'd redoubled my efforts to practice. And looking back now, if 2008 Nate could see how 2024 Nate plays, he wouldn't have needed the book. Not that I'm saying I'm particularly great, just that I've made enough progress since 08 that what I thought was the ceiling definitely wasn't. So what was this mysterious study that completely changed my attitude about the possibilities of success? In the mid-90s, Anders Ericsson and his colleagues studied music students in Germany. They asked the teachers at the music school to categorize the students by their ability. There were average students, decently good ones, then the truly elite. Ericsson and his colleagues also collected a bunch of data about practice habits, background, and other relevant information about the students. The 1-2 punch of the study, the thing that restored my hope in the possibility of becoming a good drummer, was this. There was only one factor associated with the students reaching the highest echelon of ability. Family background, daily habits, etc., none of that predicted anything. The single predictor was practice time. As I understand it, all of the so-called elite students had put in at least 10,000 hours of practice. And here's my favorite part. No one who had put in 10,000 hours was not in the elite group. Now let me check some sources and make sure I'm not bastardizing that because it's important. Okay, looks like I got the basic gist. There's some caveats I'll mention later. Anyway, why was that such a game changer? What if I told you nobody who'd put in 10,000 hours learning the drums hadn't become really good? Would that change your opinion of talent? Think about all the hours you've practiced. Is it anywhere near 10,000? That's 2 hours a day, 7 days a week for 13 years. So I think this helps with layer 2 of the argument. Remember, layer 1 was, I don't sound like Siberiano right now, so maybe I just don't have it. And his video of his past performance was maybe good enough to poke holes in that. But layer 2, the slightly deeper argument was, even if I sound as good now as past Siberiano, maybe he has more talent than I do, so there's a cap on my progress, whereas he is able to keep going. But before I give you the caveats to the 10,000 hour rule, if we take it in its strongest form, you have all these elite music students and they've all put in 10,000 hours, and nobody who put in that time failed to be elite. If that's true, it means it's less likely that you won't be very good if you simply put in as much time as Siberiano did. So that's it? It's open and shut? I'm guaranteed to be successful if I just shed my eyeballs out? Well, not so fast. Ah, man! I know, this guy hates me at this point. Other me hates me. Chew on that. But not so fast. There are some good and bad critiques of the pop science interpretation of Ericsson's research. Then there are some caveats, even if everything I read in Outliers is true. First, the critiques. According to one source, the 10,000 hour number wasn't a threshold, but an average. That means, presumably, some students had practiced way more and others considerably less. So does that mean it's debunked? Maybe the talented kids were everybody who practiced 7.5K hours, and everybody who practiced more than that is a grinder. Crap! But not so fast, and I think you see where I'm going. In a normal distribution, the average still means most of the students practiced very close to the average, 10,000. The more we deviate from the average, the fewer the students. So you might get a few odd students who only took 7K, and a few who took 13, but they're a much smaller number than those around the average. Plus, the averages for the less than spectacular musicians were lower. In plain English, that still means you have a way higher likelihood of being really good if you practice more. And the distribution means you're still very likely to be elite if you practice 10,000 hours. But what about other studies that seem to contradict that finding? Because those exist. You cannot keep doing this to me. Sorry, my guy. And look, I don't want this to get super dry. Like, here's some Dave Weckl. Check that out for a second. Okay, now let's get this last not super relevant critique out of the way. And that's just my opinion. But I kind of need to make this airtight, so reply guys can't just be like, well, actually XYZ. So there's a meta study that seems to say deliberate practice, which is the 10,000 hour thing, only predicted 1% of skills variance between elite athletes. And another source saying that certain studies found deliberate practice only predicted 21% of skills variance in music. I'll link that meta study below. The other source didn't link all their sources, and I'm not sure they're good faith after reading them a little bit. But you can Google 10,000 hour rule debunked and see what you see. And strap on your critical thinking pants, you guys. Anyway, how can those two things exist in the same universe? Deliberate practice explained almost all the variation in Ericsson's cohorts, but only 21% in this mysterious study some blogger referenced but didn't link. And only 1% in sports. Well, what if different disciplines are different? What if sports are more attribute-based? And indeed, that's what we do find in elite athletes, as David Epstein explains in his book, The Sports Gene. The higher level you go, the more people cluster around certain common body types. But are drums that way? Let's roll this montage of drummers you'll probably agree are all really good. Doesn't look like there's just one body type. We should be open to the idea that in certain domains, what you're born with has a big effect on whether you can be elite, and in others, less so. And I can't directly explain that 21% of musicians thing because it wasn't linked directly, but I'll give you some thoughts on why I think that may have happened further on in the video. But let's go back to Ericsson with the good critiques. Let's say we find a big music school and we analyze all the things that the best players there are doing, and we find out that they all practiced an average of 10,000 hours. How could this be true and talent still play a role? Well, easily. For one thing, players in music school are typically young. What if 10,000 hours is enough to get great, but only if you get it in before age 22 or so? Indeed, some studies of language learning underscore this. People who start learning a second language past the age of something I'm not going to Google, but I think it's early teens, are less likely to speak the second language without an accent. So maybe if you haven't put in those 10K by 22, you're just shit out of luck. I'm just triggered. But again, check out Siberiano here. Check out Sean Crowder here. Do you know for sure that all their transformation came before 22? A little Googling reveals Siberiano is around 27 now, in 2024. I was going to say maybe the brain plasticity thing plays a little role, but probably music and drums are different enough from language that it doesn't affect it as much. Remember at the top of this video when I said there's still something that gives me a lot of hope? Well, that's still ahead. Keep hope alive! But before we get there, the two strongest challenges to the 10,000 hour rule, in my humble opinion. Still keeping hope alive. That's my boy.
Hey, you. Put on some muscle?
I did?
No.
The second legitimate place talent could hide in a 10,000 hour study is the chicken egg thing. Sure, everybody who made it to an elite level practiced an average of 10,000 hours. But what if they were able to stick with it for that long because they were talented? Maybe the talent gave them a burning desire to push through all the setbacks and go into the shed even when they didn't feel like it. Maybe they also got good results early on as a result of talent and realized, I have a knack for this. Then, because of talent, they never had to wait too long to break through to a new level, so that kept them coming back. My verdict here is I think that's probably true. I think people who aren't born with a passion or a knack for something probably mainly aren't going to have the willpower and aren't getting the positive feedback enough to push through. Let's go on to the number one reason the 10,000 hour thing could still be true, but talent could still be an important component. And this might explain why that other study some blogger referenced but didn't link that showed that deliberate practice, the 10,000 hour thing, only predicted 21% of music success. The cohort effect. Ericsson and his colleagues were starting with people already in music school. There's a big chance that they were there because they were talented in the first place. And everybody who couldn't hack it just didn't make it into music school or never tried. In other words, the 10,000 hour rule is really just a reminder that among talented people, they still have to work hard, and you can languish in mediocrity even if you're talented if you don't put in the work. Which, I mean, Michael Jordan could have told you in the 90s.
You're just making excuses.
So, how are we feeling? I'm ready for that drop some hope thing. Okay, ready for this? Here's my hot take. I think talent is real. I think there are absolutely people with an affinity for things or certain things that just come easily for them. Think about your friend who's interested in math or engineering or planes or dinosaurs. People who are parents tell me they can spot it right away. They'll have a kid who just takes to certain things and not to others. And I think talent plays a big role at two stages. The first is at the beginning. So if somebody wants to be good at drums, it's probably a big leg up if they got this drum gene, whatever that is. But here's the thing. If you're watching my videos, if you've already put in some years on the drums, and if you're practicing every day and looking for ways to be better, here's something a lot of people who aren't achieving success yet don't consider. Maybe you're already one of the talented ones, and you just haven't worked hard enough for long enough. I mean, what would it look like for Siberiano at year 1 or 2 of his drum journey? Probably like he was passionate about this thing, but wasn't very good yet. And I often say to my students, many of whom have to audition for coaching with me, so it's kind of a selected cohort, if you're on this call, you probably already have the talent. Yay, that's it! Rejoice! But I said talent comes in at 2 points. Hang on. What? Yup, all this nuance. By the way, if you're still watching this video at this point, and also, subscribe to my mailing list. Like, what are you doing watching this much of my video and not getting the lesson of the week in the video podcast early, and hearing about stuff like my coaching enrollments and getting my free courses? Click the link below the player. But I said there were 2 places talent plays a role, in my experience. And the second place is at the very, very, very tip top, at closer to the end of the journey. Players like Vinny or Tony Williams, or modern players like Mike Mitchell, JD Beck, or Mark Giuliano. Meaning I also think talent probably plays a role when you're talking about the difference between a top 2% player and like a once a generation player. But here's where I think all this cashes out. If you knew you could be a top 2% player, but not a top 0.1% player, would you quit? I think the major revelation here, huge if true, is that it's likely you already have the talent to become a very, very good player. And indeed, I'm far from the top of the so-called pecking order. But I love to play, and I'm good enough that the experience of playing feels really good to me. And as I said at the beginning, I believe if 2008 Nate had seen how I sound in 2024, he would not have needed that book to feel hope. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's a super longie. It's a longie and a deepie. Have a comment, I'm sure you will. Leave it below. Try to keep it polite, but whatever. I might respond to those comments. Anyway, dudes, it's been real. Always enjoy these. See you again real soon in another lesson of the week. Oh, it's flight 69. It's flight 70. Flight 71. And looking back now, if 2008 Nate could see how... Flight 71. I'm not stopping. Or I'm not doing that again. Kill me. Is that flight 72 or 73? Flight 75. I don't care. Flight 76, I don't care. Flight 77. It's a fucking mess. We do our best. We do our best here, you guys.